The Hobo Clown. Chapter 1. The Awakening. Nathaniel's eyes fluttered open, the tendrils of a restless sleep still clinging to his consciousness. His bedroom was dark, the only illumination coming from the faint moonlight seeping through the curtains. He lay still, trying to shake off the fog of dreams that had clouded his mind. As his vision adjusted, he became aware of a figure standing at the foot of his bed. He froze. There, illuminated by the soft glow of the moon, stood a hobo clown. The figure was tall, gaunt, and garbed in tattered clothes. A once bright, now faded, checkered coat hung loosely on his skeletal frame, and oversized shoes with flapping soles adorned his feet. His face was painted white, with exaggerated red lips curling into a grotesque smile. But it was the eyes that sent a shiver down Nathaniel's spine. They were dark, hollow, and seemed to bore into his very soul. Nathaniel blinked, hoping the figure would vanish like a remnant of his nightmares. But the clown remained, its eerie grin widening as if relishing his terror. Who are you?" Nathaniel stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The clown didn't respond. Instead, it took a step closer, its movements slow and deliberate, like a predator savoring the fear of its prey. Nathaniel's heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline coursing through his veins urging him to flee, yet his body remained paralyzed by an unseen force. Leave me alone," he managed to choke out. The clown tilted its head to the side, its smile never wavering. A low, raspy chuckle escaped its lips, filling the room with an unnatural echo. Nathaniel felt a chill run down his spine, as if the temperature had suddenly dropped. Summoning every ounce of willpower, he forced himself to move. He bolted upright and reached for the lamp on his bedside table, fumbling with the switch. Light flooded the room, and he turned back towards the foot of the bed. The clown was gone. Nathaniel's breathing was ragged, his pulse racing. He scanned the room, his eyes darting from corner to corner, but there was no sign of the sinister figure. The only sound was the steady tick-tock of the clock on the wall. He sat there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for the clown to reappear. But the minutes ticked by, and the room remained empty. Gradually, his heartbeat slowed, and he began to question his sanity. Had it all been a hallucination? A figment of his imagination conjured by the remnants of a nightmare? He lay back down, his mind racing with questions. Sleep was out of the question, so he stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and he drifted into a fitful sleep. Chapter 2. The Encounter. Nathaniel woke the next morning to the harsh blare of his alarm. The events of the previous night came rushing back, but in the stark light of day, they seemed almost absurd. He shook his head, trying to dispel the lingering unease. After a quick shower and a cup of strong coffee, he felt more like himself. He chalked up the encounter to a vivid nightmare and tried to put it out of his mind. But as he went about his day, the image of the hobo clown kept creeping back into his thoughts. That evening, Nathaniel returned home, still haunted by the memory. He double-checked the locks on his doors and windows before finally settling into bed. Despite his precautions, sleep eluded him. He lay awake for hours, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, half expecting the clown to reappear. When he finally drifted off, his sleep was plagued by unsettling dreams. He found himself in an abandoned carnival, the air thick with the scent of rust and decay. The distant sound of a calliope echoed through the empty stalls, and he wandered through the desolate landscape, searching for a way out. The clown was there, always just out of sight, its laughter a constant, mocking presence. No matter how fast he ran, he could never escape the sound. It grew louder and louder until it was deafening, drowning out his thoughts. Nathaniel woke with a start, his heart pounding. He glanced at the clock, 3:33 a.m., the witching hour. He sat up, wiping the sweat from his brow, and glanced around the room. His eyes were drawn to the foot of the bed, where the clown had stood the previous night. It was empty, but the unease remained. Suddenly, a soft thud came from the hallway outside his bedroom. Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat. He strained his ears, listening intently. Another thud, followed by a slow, dragging sound. Summoning his courage, he slipped out of bed and crept towards the door. He opened it a crack and peered into the dimly lit hallway. The sound was coming from the living room. He tiptoed down the hall, the floorboards creaking under his weight. As he reached the living room, he saw a shadow moving across the wall. The dragging sound grew louder, accompanied by a soft, raspy whisper. Nathaniel edged closer, his heart in his throat. He peered around the corner, and his blood ran cold. The Hobo Clown was standing in the middle of the room, its back to him. It was dragging something heavy across the floor, a large, old-fashioned suitcase. The clown's whispering grew more intense, as if it were chanting some dark incantation. Nathaniel took a step back, his mind racing. He had to get out of there, had to escape whatever nightmare he had stumbled into. But as he turned to flee, the floorboard creaked beneath his foot. The whispering stopped. Nathaniel froze, his breath caught in his throat. Slowly, the clown turned to face him, its dark eyes gleaming with malevolent delight. Chapter 3: The Revelation. Nathaniel's legs felt like they were made of lead, but he forced himself to move, to run. He bolted down the hallway, the echo of the clown's laughter chasing him. He didn't dare look back, focusing only on reaching the front door. His hands fumbled with the lock in his panic, but he managed to wrench the door open and spill out into the cool night air. He sprinted down the street, his bare feet slapping against the pavement, not stopping until he reached the safety of a well-lit convenience store a few blocks away. The cashier looked up in surprise as Nathaniel stumbled inside, disheveled and breathless. "Are you okay, man?" he asked, concern etched on his face. Nathaniel shook his head, trying to catch his breath. There's someone in my house," he managed to gasp out. "A clown." The cashier frowned, clearly skeptical, but he handed Nathaniel the phone. "You should call the police." Nathaniel nodded, his hands trembling as he dialed 911. He explained the situation as best as he could, the dispatcher promising to send a patrol car immediately. He stayed in the store, the fluorescent lights providing a semblance of safety, until the police arrived. 2 officers escorted him back to his house, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Nathaniel stayed behind them, his nerves on edge as they entered the house. They searched every room, every corner, but there was no sign of the clown. "It looks like there's no one here," one of the officers said, a note of disbelief in his voice. "But I saw him," Nathaniel insisted. "He was right there, dragging a suitcase." The officers exchanged glances. "We'll file a report, but there's not much we can do without more evidence. Maybe you should stay somewhere else tonight, just to be safe." Nathaniel nodded numbly. He packed a bag and headed to a nearby motel, too shaken to return home. As he lay in the uncomfortable bed, he replayed the night's events over and over in his mind, trying to make sense of the madness. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that the clown was still out there, watching, waiting. Chapter 4: The Investigation. Over the next few days, Nathaniel delved into research, desperate for any clue that might explain the appearance of the Hobo Clown. He scoured the internet, visited libraries, and even consulted with a few local historians. He discovered a dark history behind his house, one that had been buried beneath layers of time and forgetfulness. In the early 1900s, a traveling carnival had passed through the town. The carnival had been led by a charismatic but sinister figure known only as Laughing Jack. He had been a clown, notorious for his eerie performances and rumored to dabble in dark magic. His carnival had been the site of several mysterious disappearances, children who were never seen again. The townspeople had eventually grown suspicious and confronted Laughing Jack, but he and his carnival vanished overnight, leaving nothing but rumors and ghost stories in their wake. Nathaniel's house had been built on the land where the carnival had once set up camp. The more he learned, the more Nathaniel was convinced that Laughing Jack had somehow returned, his malevolent spirit lingering in the place where he had once wrought terror. Armed with this knowledge, Nathaniel knew he had to confront the clown and put an end to the haunting. Chapter 5. The Confrontation. Nathaniel returned to his house, steeling himself for what lay ahead. He carried with him an assortment of items he hoped would help salt, iron nails, and a book of ancient banishments he had found in an occult shop. He set up a protective circle in his living room, spreading the salt in a wide arc and placing the iron nails at strategic points. He lit a candle and began to chant the banishment spell, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. The air grew colder, the shadows in the room deepening. Nathaniel could feel a presence watching him, the same malevolent energy that had haunted his nights. He continued to chant, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of the clown. Suddenly, the candle flickered, and the temperature dropped even further. Nathaniel's breath came out in frosty puffs. The laughter started, low and mocking, echoing through the room. Nathaniel held his ground, repeating the incantation with more force. The laughter grew louder, almost deafening, and then, with a final word, he shouted the last line of the banishment. The room exploded in a burst of light, blinding Nathaniel momentarily. When he opened his eyes, the clown was there, standing just outside the circle. Its eyes were filled with rage, its grin twisted into a snarl. "You cannot banish me," it hissed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "I am eternal. I am fear incarnate." Nathaniel felt a surge of defiance. "You're just a remnant, a shadow. You don't belong here." With that, he grabbed the iron nails and hurled them at the clown. The nails pierced its form, causing it to writhe and scream. The sound was unbearable, but Nathaniel didn't relent. He continued the incantation, focusing all his will on driving the clown out. The clown's form began to waver, its edges blurring. It let out one final, ear-piercing scream before dissolving into a cloud of dark smoke. The smoke swirled for a moment before dissipating, leaving the room eerily silent. Nathaniel collapsed to the floor, exhaustion washing over him. He had done it. He had faced the nightmare and emerged victorious. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. The days that followed were a blur for Nathaniel. He moved out of the house, unable to bear the memories that lingered within its walls. He found a small apartment on the other side of town, a place that felt safe and new. He kept to himself, still haunted by the encounter, but relieved that the clown was gone. The nightmares gradually faded, replaced by more mundane concerns. He returned to work, reconnected with friends, and tried to rebuild his life. But the memory of the clown never truly left him. Every so often, he would catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of his eye, a flicker of movement, a shadow where there shouldn't be one. He would turn, his heart racing, but there would be nothing there. Nathaniel knew he would never forget the terror he had faced, but he also knew that he had overcome it, and that gave him strength. He had faced his darkest fears and emerged stronger for it. Years later, he would tell the story to those who would listen, a cautionary tale about the things that lurk in the shadows, waiting to prey on the unsuspecting. Some believed him, others didn't. But Nathaniel knew the truth. The Hobo Clown was real, and he had faced it and won. Chapter 7: The Return. Time passed, and the events of those fateful nights became distant memories for Nathaniel. He had moved on, or so he thought. But one evening, as he was settling into his new routine, he received an unexpected visitor. It was an old man, frail and hunched over, his eyes clouded with age, but still sharp with purpose. He introduced himself as Samuel, a historian who had dedicated his life to uncovering the mysteries of the town's past. "I heard about your encounter," Samuel said, his voice raspy but firm. "And I believe you. Laughing Jack was real, and his curse is not easily broken." Nathaniel felt a chill run down his spine. "I thought I had banished him." "You did," Samuel nodded. "But spirits like him are tenacious. They find ways to return, especially if they have a strong connection to a place." "What do I do?" Nathaniel asked, the fear creeping back into his heart. "There is one final ritual," Samuel said, pulling out an ancient, weathered book. "It's risky, but it can sever the connection once and for all. You'll need to return to the house." Nathaniel felt a knot tighten in his stomach, but he knew he had no choice. He had to finish what he started. Chapter 8: The Final Battle. Armed with Samuel's book and a newfound resolve, Nathaniel returned to his old house. It looked abandoned, the windows boarded up and the yard overgrown. He stepped inside, the air thick with dust and memories. Samuel had given him detailed instructions. The ritual required a personal item of Laughing Jack's, something that had been in the house during his performances. Nathaniel had found an old, rusted toy hidden in the attic, a jack-in-the-box with the clown's face painted on it. He placed the toy in the center of the living room and began the incantation. The air grew colder, the shadows lengthening as he chanted. The house creaked and groaned, as if protesting his presence. The jack-in-the-box started to shake, the handle turning on its own. Nathaniel kept chanting, his voice growing louder to drown out the sinister melody. The lid popped open, and the clown's head sprang out, its eyes glowing with malevolence. A cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles Nathaniel had lit. The darkness closed in, and he felt the clown's presence, stronger than ever. He continued the incantation, his voice unwavering despite the terror gripping his heart. The clown emerged from the toy, its form more solid, more real than before. It lunged at Nathaniel, but he stood his ground, finishing the final words of the ritual. The room erupted in light, blinding and pure. The clown screamed, its form disintegrating into wisps of smoke. The house shook, the walls cracking as the energy built to a crescendo. Then, with a deafening roar, the presence vanished, and the house fell silent. Nathaniel collapsed, the exhaustion overwhelming him. But he knew it was over. The connection was severed, and Laughing Jack was gone for good. Chapter 9: The Peace. Nathaniel left the house for the last time, the weight of the ordeal lifting from his shoulders. He returned to his new home, a sense of peace finally settling over him. The nightmares ceased, replaced by dreams of light and hope. Samuel visited him a few weeks later, a knowing smile on his face. "You did it," he said simply. Nathaniel nodded. "Thank you for helping me." "Sometimes the past must be confronted to secure the future," Samuel replied. "You've done more than banish a spirit. You've broken a cycle of fear that haunted this town for generations." Nathaniel smiled, a genuine relieved smile. He had faced the darkness and won. And now, he could finally look forward to the future with hope. The memory of the Hobo Clown would always linger, a reminder of the horrors that lurk in the shadows. But Nathaniel had learned that courage and resolve could conquer even the darkest of nightmares. And with that knowledge, he moved forward, ready to embrace whatever life had in store for him. Epilogue: The Legacy. Years turned into decades, and Nathaniel's story became a legend in the town. The old house was eventually torn down, replaced by a park where children played and laughter filled the air. The dark history was forgotten, replaced by new memories and new beginnings. Nathaniel lived a long, fulfilling life, his encounter with the Hobo Clown a distant but defining moment. He wrote a book about his experiences, a tale of horror and courage that inspired many. And as he lay on his deathbed, surrounded by loved ones, he felt a sense of peace. He had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. The Hobo Clown was no more, and the town was safe. As he took his final breath, he smiled, knowing that he had left a legacy of bravery and hope. The shadows might always be there, but he had shown that they could be defeated. And that was a legacy worth leaving behind.